Thank you all for having me so much. So I have I'm kind of in a unique position right now where I'm working at Google in developer relations, specifically on Angular, obviously, but that affords me a lot of kind of flexibility and freedom to play with tools, to try out new ideas, experiment, and do so in a way where I'm not personally working on say a production application that hundreds of thousands or more users are actually using every day, where I can I can make mistakes. I can work on example projects and work on greenfield opportunities. And what I'd like to do today is kind of use my experience to kind of tell you a little bit about what I've learned about how to work with AI, what opportunities there are, and kind of what I'm thinking about. I'll start with just coding with AI. It's very different when you really kind of commit to it. I know Dimitro was talking about this a little bit in terms of his experience, but it's kind of weird, new, uncomfortable, awesome. I mean, depending on your own experience, you might have had a different experience than someone else. You might love it, you might hate it. And one of the things I've been kind of seeing as a trend is kind of moving towards this agent first design pattern when it comes to coding. And this is a screenshot from Anti-Gravity, which was announced recently by Google. And as you can see here, I do have an open IDE button, but this is definitely not an IDE first type of view. This is an agent centric view, right? So it's different. And if you were to choose to take this approach, it would take some getting used to, right? And one of the things I've tried to do is experiment with this type of approach in addition to kind of CLIs or working more from my traditional editor with the help of an agent or something like that. But I think one of the things I've been thinking about recently is when you kind of think about coding with agents in this context, uh, it's really easy to fall into a couple of different traps. And this is a screenshot from a blog post I wrote recently. And just as a heads up, I'm going to provide a lot of pointers and references to other things I've done just to kind of reference concepts. If you're interested in any of these, feel free to go check them out, get a deeper dive. But this was about kind of how I think about just working with AI in general. And I've been really into progression fantasy and kind of RPG lit novels recently. And two of the books and series I've been reading recently had some sort of like AI. And I was thinking about kind of how they operate with the people who actually take advantage of them. So I'll start on the right. This is from a book called Operation Bounce House by Matt Dinneman, who also is the author of Dungeon Crawler Carl, if anybody is into that. I'm a big fan, but I'm not going to get into the book too much, but there's an AI, it's a robot, and it's in this like dystopian future where they have a farm. The robot runs the farm. They're all dependent on the robot. The robot needs everything, and I think the robot means everything to them. Without the robot, like they're done for, right? And as I'm thinking about this, right, um, there's this term that's been thrown around a lot lately: cognitive surrender, right? I don't know if other folks have been hearing about this, but it's when you basically kind of just like let the agent do everything and you just accept what they're saying, right? You don't really question it. You just kind of in your terminal maybe using a agentic CLI and just kind of hit enter until you get what you want. Very much kind of that vibe coding feel. You're at the mercy of the agent in this case. Now, on the other side, we have a series that I like called Cradle. You don't really need to know much about it, but one of the characters gets it's not technically an AI, it's called a mind spirit, but basically like think of it as an agent that lives inside your brain, but it's not telling you what to do. It's more of a thought partner, someone who works with you. And I think this is kind of the pattern that I found more success adopting, right? And to give a perfect example, I was working on a project recently, and I was just kind of thinking about this idea, and I ended up just chatting with Gemini on my phone for, I don't know, it's like a few hours, just kind of talking about it, poking holes in my idea. And it was really a back and forth. Like I was talking to a really, really smart friend who knew a lot about this area. So, as you start to think about coding with AI, I would highly encourage you to take this kind of mind spirit approach. And as you do so, here's some kind of tips that I've come across in my own experience. The first one I've kind of talked about a little bit, which is kind of just fleshing out the plan, right? Talk through it. One of the things that I really like to do is, instead of just going to an agent and saying, all right, here's an idea I have. Can you write a design doc for me? I'll actually I work with a lot of creative approaches here. So one of the things I'll do is I'll say, like, uh, I'll say, I have an idea. Tell me why this won't work, right? And you end up coming up with a lot of interesting ideas that way, as opposed to just kind of asking directly for what you want. That kind of goes hand in hand with this next point, which is poke holes early, try to find edge cases. And then once you have a big plan, this is very much from my experience and my mistakes too. Like, I've had a really in-depth plan and tried to give it to an agent just to see how it would go, and went really well for a while, and then everything just fell apart, right? And I started to look into it to debug. So much code had been written so quickly, I didn't even know where to begin debugging this thing. So I literally just scrapped this entire project and started over. What I found that works better, even though some agents might be capable of doing the whole thing in one shot, is break it into small steps and have very clear success criteria. And that way, you can work on this iteratively, but also, if something goes wrong, you have the ability to kind of take a step back and dive in and troubleshoot. And then the last one, and this is something I've been playing around with a little bit recently that's been pretty cool, which is automate the output. And Dimitro talked a little bit about cognitive debt, right? And I've had this too, right? Like, if we look at this, this is just a fake, like, I was like, hey, make me a fitness tracker, and it generated, 4,000 lines of code. But even if you're not doing something like that with a greenfield application, and you're doing a ton of features all at once, or maybe the agent's working so quickly you can't really follow what they're doing, what I found is you can automate output. So one example is just logging. LLMs are really good at just adding logs at great places that are highly descriptive and easy to follow. In addition to just logging to your console, you can just log those to disk, which is also great because of when things go wrong, then the model has access to the logs that have been written now, and it has a running history of that. And then taking that a step further, one thing I've really been experimenting with lately is, after a model, like, I've created a skill basically where after a model does some sort of big complex change, I'll have it put together a rich HTML document for me that summarizes basically what it changed, where the code lives, some key parts of it, basically my guide to the code base. And this is great for me, but this is also great for teammates if they want to start hopping in. And then it's also great for other agents. If I want to switch agents, switch sessions, all of a sudden I have this document that captures all that text. And it doesn't have to be HTML. It can be, Markdown or simple text file. I personally like the HTML approach because it helps me just visually see everything. So this has been a really cool tool for me to use. But the one thing I will say, when you're actually writing code, I know people have different opinions on that. I really do think if you're working on anything that is important in production, you really should review every single line of code, because agents are so good at solving problems, but they're really good at solving problems to kind of get to a singular objective, right? Like, here is my bug, here is my problem. And this can introduce security vulnerabilities. I'm not going to read through these on the screen, but you can see some examples here of actions LLMs might take in order to solve a problem, not thinking about the broader scope, because sometimes they lack judgment. And to give you an example, like I've been in a situation where I was using a library and there was a bug in my implementation. And rather than try to solve the bug, the LLM's approach was, hey, let me just get rid of your library and rewrite this entire thing from scratch. I was like, no, please don't do that. So it's really important that you review code and you review it early, because the longer you wait to review the code, I think those kind of either the cognitive debt, the technical debt, or the mistakes, I find they compound over time, right? So let's talk a little bit about kind of practical tips for agentic engineering. So coding with AI. And I gave a talk at NGConf last year called Architect or Assembler, Your Role in the Future of AI. And one of the things that I talked about was this idea of a context pipeline engineering. And the basic premise here was that you basically want to put together all of the context, provide the agent with all the context you can in order to make it work in its best way for you, to have the best output with the least amount of work for you. And this is composed of a lot of different components, a lot of different parts. And one of which is kind of just context that comes from maybe the team that maintains this particular technology. In our case, we put together, we have the Angular MCP server, Model Context Protocol. And this is basically just a way to provide context and tools directly from the Angular team to your agentic coding environment or CLI, just to help it follow best practices. And some of the new ones we've introduced recently are dev server wait to build, which just waits to actually start building, waits to for the build to complete before kind of taking the next step. And that goes hand in hand with two others, devserver.start and devserver.stop. And if you're like me, you might be asking yourself, well, why would I need a kind of an MCP tool to start the dev server, right? Like, there is a NGS. It's pretty straightforward, right? I can just start my server that way. And basically, the idea here is that you want to kind of provide a mechanism so that way the agent who's doing the coding has access to the build logs, and it can tell if anything's broken while you're coding. That way you don't have to go back and forth pasting logs from your terminal into the agent to say, hey, this broke, and can you fix it? That sort of thing. So this is all about kind of creating systems to help the AI be highly efficient in generating code and debugging and things like that. And those are just a couple of the newer tools, but there's a lot of different tools that you can find examples, list best practices. So for migrations, my personal favorite, the AI tutor, which teaches you Angular. But and if you want to install it, you just run ng MCP, and that'll give you the configuration to add it to your environment. So, just as a heads up, if these slides look familiar, I borrowed a little bit from Mark's IO talk, but I'm going to go through them quickly because I have some more kind of context and things I want to share. And then on the other side, we have some Chrome DevTools for agents that are recently. And this is a really cool example. Like, if you want to update the homepage of your app to show performance show times and take a screenshot to verify the changes, the Chrome team made these dev tools that make this really easy. So if you were to use this, kind of combine the power of the Angular MCP with these Chrome dev tools for agents, and you have the Angular MCP tool, build the application, start the server, And then the DevTools for agents, check the browser, take a screenshot, and boom, easy. So here's just like a little video demonstrating that, but there's actually more that you can do with Chrome DevTools than just take screenshots. You can navigate to pages, you can fill out forms, you can check performance and improve performance metrics of your app directly using those tools. You can read console logs. This kind of goes along with what I was saying earlier about kind of automating that pipeline and that process to give the agents context and things like that. This you can see this is successfully took the screenshot and verified. So with that, if you want to actually check these out, here's some links for the Angular MCP and Chrome DevTools for agents. And then the next thing I'll talk about is Angular skills. And if you're not familiar, skills, kind of a different approach to providing agents with context. And this is something that the Angular team released earlier this year. And there's two skills here that I'll talk about: Angular Developer and Angular New App. And the first one, Angular Developer, I mean, this is another way to kind of provide those best practices to agents. And this is really helpful when we think about kind of new features, and kind of relates to one of the questions I was talking about earlier with Chris, where, we're always on this kind of moving cycle of when were the models trained, when are features released, you got to keep up. And it's the sort of thing where there's always this gap in understanding after the model was trained. How do you provide that context to the models so you don't have to keep going back and explaining things? And skills are a great way to do that. But what's cool about skills is they work in this context of progressive disclosure. So the Angular developer skills only, I think, 141 lines. And then what it does is it exposes access to all these other skills specific to features like linked signal and resource and signal forms, where as the model needs it, it'll grab that context so it doesn't pollute your entire context window. The other one I'll talk about is Angular New App, which, again, you might be thinking to yourself, well, hello, NG New, that's pretty easy. But maybe you're new to Angular, maybe getting your environment set up is more of a challenge for you. So this is a good one to help you get started from that perspective. And then for all of you contributors out there, we've got some contributor skills that can really come in handy. So you can start using Angular skills today, but I would also encourage you to use your own skills today, right? So we're kind of at the point where the agents are getting really good, to the point where a lot of the commodity work, I'll call it, you might want to do could be kind of automated, right? Let's say you have a component that you want to create, or a set of components, and they all follow your team's kind of design standards, best practices. This is all something that you can bake into a skill, right? And that way, instead of just writing boilerplate, if you know exactly how it's going to turn out, you know exactly what comments are going to come up on the PR, you can get past that with a simple prompt. And it doesn't even have to necessarily be an official skill. Like, skills are just prompts. You could just keep this in a text file in your directory that you share with other folks, and use it to just kind of automate and expedite a lot of the things that you're doing, just to make your own life easier. And then you're not just limited to skills. You can also build tools to do different things. And I think this is where kind of vibe coding actually has a home, is a good fit. So I know there's a lot of negative connotation around vibe coding, but I think there's a place for it. And I'll give you a perfect example. So one of the folks on our team was actually vibe coded a tool to triage a bunch of GitHub issues on the Angular repository. And he basically vibe coded this tool, and then created some agentic flows to help him out. and was able to kind of bang through, I don't know, a few hundred issues way faster than he would have before. And I hope that kind of illustrates an important point for you, which is uh, if you want to vibe code or you want to kind of use an agent for coding and not necessarily check their work, it really depends on what the code's being used for, right? If this is a tool to help you do a one-off task, go for it. You don't need to know if the code is good, right? You're the only one using it, and it's, you might only use it once, right? But if you're, rolling something into production, well, that's kind of a different story because there are actual business implications involved there. So in that case, you actually want to review everything. You want to make sure it's scalable, maintainable. But if you're just, running a script or writing a script or making a tool, by all means, vibe code. And I think that's one of the things I want to help folks understand is kind of how to use different tools and when to use them. Because a lot of this, at least for me, a lot of my experiences just come from experimentation and really just kind of getting reps and understanding where the strengths and weaknesses of these different approaches are. And if you do want to vibe code with Angular, you've got a bunch of different options like just the Gemini web app. And you could also use Google AI Studio by just selecting your framework like that. Here's an idea. But I want to get into some other kind of interesting topics here too. Not just how to write code, but what is the future of apps, right? Because with AI, we now have so many new opportunities to kind of create experiences that seemed, I don't know, magical or impossible before. And as the simplest example, this is from a live stream I did early last year, where I just created an interactive choose your own adventure graphic novel builder. And I know this is kind of a contrived example, unless you are a graphic novel company or something, I don't know why you need this, but I hope this does illustrate a lot of different kind of points where you can build experiences for people that seem magical in the context of your app and your business. And it's pretty easy to do that. I mean, using this app used GenKit and with resource, this is a nice little pattern to kind of just generate different content. And I know Mark also did a video, I think, using Vertex AI to demonstrate some of these different concepts as well. But it goes further than just kind of generating images or generating text. You can now generate an entire user interface. So I don't know if folks have heard of A2UI or AGUI, but basically A2UI is a protocol for describing interfaces, where one agent can receive a request of what a user wants, turn around and give you basically a description that can be turned into a user interface on the fly that exactly kind of answers what the user is looking for. And this, as you can imagine, there are a lot of use cases for this. There are a lot of times this isn't the right approach, right? Static pages, things like that. Like a lot of people expect deterministic flows, but as you think about your application, might there be an opportunity to kind of create some dynamic experiences that are really useful for folks? And if we take that a step further, let's kind of broaden our thinking a little bit, right? I think a lot of how people interact with the internet at large is going to change. Not saying that folks are going to abandon the browser by any means, because I don't see that happening. But I think folks will spend more time inside of AI applications like the Gemini app, for example, where you might want to ask a question, and instead of just getting a text answer, what you'll start to see is via MCP, you can actually deliver a component to, and I think one of the great examples I've seen is like booking a flight, where now the card from your flight can actually be put directly into the chat that you can interact with it. So maybe a lot of the web is actually pulled into these agentic experiences where you can kind of experience somebody's application in different places. So it's kind of a different way to think about these things. And if you are interested in this, there's an Angular specific renderer that you can use to make this really easy to integrate with Angular. And then there's in partnership, so Copilot Kit built this A2UI widget builder that you can use to easily kind of build these different kind of cards that you can use. And I hope this better illustrates kind of what I was talking about. And this will give you a lot of the different building blocks you need in order to use A2UI. And just to kind of give an example, like here's an app that I built for fun. So I just had this kind of very, very basic demo sales pipeline spreadsheet here. So I built an app, like a fake Google Doc app called HyperDoc, where basically what I did was I just said, all right, turn this into an app. And it used A2UI to just on its own come up with this cool dashboard for me, which I thought was pretty cool. And then, I can give additional, context. I say, add a title, analyze the data, give me an executive summary. And it does cool things like this. So, there's a lot of opportunities out there, a lot of ideas. I think it's, you're really kind of only constrained by your own creativity. And, you're not just limited to that. I actually did a talk last November where I built my own version of this, where I kind of rendered a custom website, custom web app with my own of my own choosing. Like I spun this up myself. So if this is interesting to you, check it out. I think if A2UI might be a little confusing for you, this might be a good way to kind of understand conceptually how things work, but just something to check out. And then one thing we talked about already, WebMCP. So, it's an emerging but experimental web standard to expose structured tools directly to agents. And I talked about this a little already, but I think there are some really exciting opportunities here. But I think the big takeaway is, think about the future of how people might interact with your apps, where they might interact with them, how, that's all changing. And, start thinking of creative solutions, like things you can do to make your own experience better. And also, think about what if you pair up WebMCP with A2UI? That's a pretty cool and powerful combination. So the last thing I'll do is, and I think this was actually a question to Dimitri, like what should you focus on? So this is another slide from my NGConf talk, and it was when I talked about it then, it was who's going to be successful. But I think I'd like to kind of rephrase it into what skills I think are the most valuable. So one is deep technical expertise. And this might be kind of counterintuitive to some folks because you're thinking, oh, well, the models are so capable, they're doing so much. Like, why do I need to keep learning? Well, I think this is actually one of the most important things you could do is just keep learning, keep developing that super deep technical expertise. It'll make you way more efficient when working with LLMs because you know what to ask for, how to ask for it. B, you can review code and make sure you're not introducing bad design patterns, things that aren't maintainable, security risks for sure. And then C, when debugging and troubleshooting, I've admittedly been in a hole where I just keep asking the agent to try to figure it out. But sometimes it works, but a lot of times your expertise is truly required in order to solve a problem. So it's really important that you keep building that deep technical expertise. Another kind of area that I would encourage folks to do, another thing I would encourage folks to do is really kind of expand your horizons. One of the cool things about AI is you can kind of get into new technologies really easily, right? And I've heard some people say, if you're a bad coder without AI, like AI is just going to make you worse, right? Because you're just going to be slinging all of this AI slop into your code base. But honestly, when I think about it, anytime I've learned a new technology, like I've always sucked when I started. My code was terrible. If I look at my early Angular code when I first ever started using Angular, it was horrible, probably. We've all been there where our code was bad. And I personally feel like I've gone through this, whenever I'm learning something, I go through this like 3-step phase where maybe it's a new technology or framework where the first time I learn something, maybe I'm watching a tutorial and I just put the line in and this line does X. I'm like, cool, this line does X. I understand. And then I want to have some sort of slight customization. So I go from, all right, how do I go from, I understand this line does X, but I don't know why. Well, then I start understanding some of the parameters, some of the options. Like, okay, I have a slightly better understanding of what this does. And then something goes horribly wrong. And I have to dive through the documentation, maybe the source code, and I really gain a deep understanding of whatever that concept is, that API, that interface. And it's at that point that I really kind of gain that expertise. And the thing is, if you're willing to put in the work and you're willing to learn and not just let AI do all of the work, like Roger in the example I was giving earlier, you can go through that process much faster, and you can learn really quickly. And we're kind of at the point where you can start using the right tool for the job more often. So I would encourage folks to kind of expand your horizons, try new technologies, see what you can do, because it'll just make you a better professional as an engineer. And then finally, context pipeline engineering. Folks who really understand how to provide context to LLMs in an efficient way, but also in an automated way, right? One of the things I was reading about recently, loop engineering, where folks are saying, oh, you don't have to write prompts anymore. You shouldn't be prompting anymore. You should be writing loops that have the agents, just work towards a goal, and they'll figure out the prompt themselves. And that's something I'll probably experiment with myself. But at the end of the day, I don't write most of my really complex pop prompts. I don't write myself. It's usually a discussion that I have with my agent, and then I'll talk to Gemini for a while, 30 minutes, and then I'll say, okay, I think you kind of understand my problem space. Write the prompts, or analyze my code base to understand all of the things that my team does kind of uniquely. Put that into a skill. I think the folks that understand that will be really successful. And if you kind of just don't surrender your thinking and your critical thinking abilities to AI, and you actually use it as a tool to make yourself better and adopt these skill sets, I think that's really where you'll find success. So with all that, I hope this talk has given you a lot to think about, some tools to kind of help you code more efficiently, some inspiration, some ideas. But yeah, thank you. Want to thank you all for having me and for spending your time with me. Really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Devin. I think that your presentation was really great. You packed so much knowledge and insights into such a short amount of time. Just wow. We are really happy having you here with us today. And now let's see if we have maybe any questions for our Q&A. And I see there are some. So the first one is, do you perform any kind of tests how Angular is working with certain agents? I mean, how that code is generated. As an example, using Angular leads to reducing the token usage.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think the web code gen score that I referenced earlier is a great tool for this sort of thing, because you can kind of customize what agent is actually performing the code generation. And I'm pretty sure it gives you, I don't know, I can't Not positive, but I'm pretty sure it gives you token usage and things like that as well, that you can use for your evaluation. And it's not even, folks are working with other technologies. It's not even specific to Angular. You can use other, web frameworks too.
All right. And the other one, what examples, this is interesting, what examples of AI adoption in the web applications have surprised you the most over the past year?
Ooh, examples of AI adoption. Surprised me. I don't know that I've had so many that have surprised me. I've had some impressive experiences where I was just kind of blown away by kind of how folks kind of made such a clean integration. I think what's been really kind of, I don't know if it's called surprising, but interesting, were some of the kind of announcements at I/O recently about how web apps are kind of being generated on the fly inside of Search and inside of Gemini. And I think that kind of points to a broader trend we might see, which is kind of short-lived ephemeral applications. And this is something I didn't really touch on, but I think the way that we're going to experience the web is going to fundamentally change in a lot of ways. Like, you might have some apps that are just short-term, one-time use. You might have some apps that are long-term use. And I think that's really interesting to me, just kind of how things are going to evolve. But really, really good question.
All right, and I believe that was the last question for our Q&A session. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for your presentation. And yeah, hopefully maybe we can see each other at some future events. So looking forward to this.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me.